Hi everyone, this is a short presentation on some of the Topaz Labs products that I own. I've been buying a number of these products over the last year or so and trying them out, and I've been very impressed with them. And I thought it'd be helpful just to give you a run through of the ones that I actually own, which are these four. So Gigapixel AI, which is an enlarging software; DeNoise AI, which unsurprisingly is to remove noise; Sharpen AI, which is sharpening; and Mask AI, which is for masking, particularly useful for making composites. So I'll just quickly take you through these and show you a couple of examples of images I've worked with, just to show you quickly what they do. So the first of those is Gigapixel AI. And as we said at the beginning, what it does, it's a photo enlargement. So it enlarges your images, and it claims to do it without losing detail. It upscales up to 6 times using machine learning, and it claims to be the only photo enlargement product available that can add detail back into your upscaled photo. And I've certainly found that to be the case very often. Not always, but very often. So here's an example of an image on the left here, which is the original image. And on the right-hand side, the same image at the same size, physically on the screen here, after Gigapixel AI has been applied. Now, they may well look exactly the same to you, depending on how you're viewing this. On my screen, I'm using a 27-inch iMac 5K Retina screen. As I look into the photo, I can certainly see there's more detail on the image on the right-hand side, but I suspect for most people, they look identical. The image on the right-hand side is actually 6 times larger, so the actual file sizes are massively different. But in terms of when you see them the same size, scaled down, they probably look the same. But if you were to zoom into the image very closely now, this is what you would see on these particular examples. So the image on the left is the original image. It's not a downsized version of the image on the right. The image on the right has been upscaled by Gigapixel, and all that extra detail has been somehow magically put back into the image. It's really remarkable the quality that it can achieve. So very, very happy and pleased with the results that I'm seeing with Gigapixel. I've actually found it to be perfect for resizing old digital photos, and I say that's one of the big uses for it. I think is so. For instance, this wedding photo I took with a fairly crappy Fujifilm compact camera from the early 2000s, 2 megapixel camera. The original picture wasn't that detailed. Now upscaling it, it's equivalent to a 30 megapixel image that could be printed extremely large, and there's a lot of detail now as returned into the image. So again, it makes it fantastic to take old digital photos, perhaps from a decade, 2 decades ago, and use the Gigapixel to upscale them. The other purpose I use Gigapixel for quite a lot actually is for when I've cropped an image. So taking lots of images of birds or macro shots of insects, even with the lenses that I use, I still often find I need to very heavily crop into an image afterwards to get a decent size subject of a bird or an insect to fill the frame, and that may mean that I've cropped an image down perhaps 50% or more. So Gigapixel is perfect to then resize that image back up to being the sort of size that is submittable for instance, for competitions or for printing out. And then one other use I find for Gigapixel, which has been really handy, is when I've been doing presentations and need to find a company logo, and on Google Images, I perhaps only be able to find a really low res, poor quality version of a company logo. I can very quickly put that into Gigapixel AI and upscale it, and then it becomes a perfect size for going into PowerPoint presentations, etc. So Gigapixel, check it out. I find it really useful. I don't use it all the time, but when I have used it, it's been very impressive. The next piece of software I do use all the time, DeNoise AI, and as the name suggests, it's a noise reduction software. And the benefit here is it takes away the fear of not getting decent shots because you've had to boost your ISO. So the claim here is shoot anywhere in any light with no reservations. And basically, to get certain shots in certain lights, the only way you're going to get a shutter speed high enough to take the image is if you're really bumping up the ISO, which is going to add a lot of noise into the image. But with DeNoise AI, you can eliminate that noise and you can recover the crisp detail in your images. And it claims DeNoise claims to be the first AI-powered noise reduction tool. So an example, here's an image of a squirrel that I took on my back fence last month. This is the original image. It's cropped in a little bit. Actually, it's probably about 80% of the original image. I took it with my Sigma 150 to 600. This is at about 400 mil. and a 1600 ISO, and it's handheld, so it's probably not quite as sharp as it should be either, but we'll get to that part later. And then, so if you zoom in on the original image, this is what you'll see. And again, you may or may not see this depending on how you're seeing this on YouTube. But this is very, very grainy. There's a lot of background grain, which you can see clearly. And that grain throughout the image, that noise throughout the image, is also obscuring some of the detail in the squirrel itself. So I use DeNoise mostly as a plugin for Lightroom. As you can see here, actually, on the dialog box, Gigapixel, DeNoise and Sharpen are all available now as plugins within Lightroom, or they can be used as standalone products. I tend to use DeNoise fairly early on in the processing in Lightroom, so I found it's better to remove the noise from an image very early on in the process, and then as you're making further adjustments, you're doing it to a clean image. You're not going to be exaggerating the noise, for instance, if you're starting to play around with colour or vibrance or saturation or contrast. I found it's better to start with a clean image that you've removed the noise from very early on. So I'll open this image up through the plugin in Lightroom to DeNoise, and this is you get a preview window here, and here you can see the image on the right hand side after the noise has been removed. Now this is the level I chose on this particular image, and you can see on the scale on the right hand side, it's about 33% of the removing noise slider function. So you have those sliders on there that you can adjust to your taste, really. And you can, in fact, also use the sliders below that to recover some original detail, which can be useful if the images sometimes look a little bit too clean and perhaps the noise has removed more than just noise. In this particular instance, about 33% looks about right to me. So you just press the apply button, the blue button at the bottom there, and that will drop back into Lightroom as a TIFF file. So you have your original raw image, untouched, of course, in Lightroom, and then you have the DeNoise version, which saves back as a TIFF. So the next product to talk about is Sharpen AI, and as it suggests, it's a sharpening piece of software. It's the only AI-powered image sharpening software available, and it says they claim to create some truly magical results. And again, I have found that to be the case. It fixes blurry images in just a few clicks and rescues previously impossible to correct shots. And it fixes 3 problems: camera shake, focus issues, or general softness. Now, I would say 2 of those it's fantastic at, which is camera shake and focus issues. In terms of general softness, I've not found the general sharpening function to be any better than sharpening in Lightroom or Photoshop or a number of other products. So it has a general sort of sharpening function, and that is okay, but no better than the others. However, for camera shake and focus issues, it's superb. So here, give you an example. Here's an image of Olivia, who I took a picture of. This is part of a photo shoot from a couple of years ago. And this is the original image, and it's a lovely image and perfectly good for Instagram and sharing on social media. On this particular shot, though, the eyes weren't in focus. The camera, I'd misfocused on this one, and the eyes are not sharp. And if we zoom in again on the image, you can see here how the image of the focus has been missed on the eyes. However, putting it through Sharpen AI and using the focus functionality, this is the result that you get from it. And I can't achieve this sort of difference using the sharpening tools in Lightroom or Photoshop. So this is significantly improved. So Sharpen AI's focus mode is stunning. It works really, really well. I've also used it very often for fixing some of the focus issues, or perhaps on macro shots of insects and things where you just need perhaps the head of the insect to become slightly more sharp than you manage to achieve in camera. So the focus function is very, very good. Even better than that is the stabilize function, which I use all the time. So again, as with DeNoise Sharpen AI, I tend to use as a plugin from Lightroom, and I tend to do this obviously after I've done adjustments to denoise it, and sometimes other minor adjustments. In this particular example, I'm just going to show I've not done anything different to the denoised image. So it's the squirrel shot that you saw earlier. It went into denoise, and now I'm opening it in Sharpen AI. So I've not done any further Lightroom adjustments to the image. So here you have on the left-hand side the original, which in this case the original is the denoise. So it's the denoise TIFF that I've opened up in Sharpen. And on the right-hand side, you can see that through stabilizing, this is the result I've decided to go with. So sharpness is fairly high on this example, so about 3/4 of the slider up, and it's a stabilize function. And what this has done is it not only has it sharpened the image, but it's actually removed some of that slight blur. And I think if you look at the image on the left now, you can see that not only is the noise gone, but actually there is a lot of softness in the original image. And that's the motion blur. I was hand holding a very long lens, trying to shoot a squirrel that's probably not perfectly still, but sitting at the end of my fence about 100 feet away. So it's done a great job at fixing that slight motion blur in the squirrel. And then you just press the apply button, and that saves back down into Lightroom as another TIFF. So I've got my original raw image, I have a TIFF file there, which is the DeNoise version, and I have a TIFF file there, which is the Sharpen version, which is great because if you realise you've perhaps over sharpened it, you can delete that image, go back to your DeNoise version, and try it again. So I found it very, very useful that it saves down to Lightroom as separate TIFFs. So this is the image of the squirrel. This is after DeNoise, after sharpening, and I've also increased the exposure just a little bit. So again, I tend to play with those sort of settings after I've done the denoising for sure, so I'm not enhancing the noise as I'm playing around with my settings. So now if you look at the before and after comparisons, on the left here you see the original image that I showed you a few slides back. This is how it came out of camera straight into Lightroom. And on the right hand side you can see the version after DeNoise and Sharpen. And the difference, I'm hoping you can see this on your screens, is staggering. I mean, it's almost as though I've gone five generations of camera improvement. It's almost as though I've gone from my, I don't know, a 5-year-old Canon camera to the latest super sharp Sony or something. The improvement to the image is so dramatic. And it's certainly better than anything I could have achieved in the normal Lightroom or Photoshop settings. So really pleased with DeNoise. Use it all the time. And Sharpen, I find, works really well where you need it. And then lastly, the excuse me, I want to talk about Mask AI. So I, as you probably imagine, do most of everything I do in Lightroom. I've kind of learnt Lightroom from ground up over the last 5 years, and I'm fairly expert at it. I've been trying to make it my goal this year to do a bit more in Photoshop and learn Photoshop, and particularly to try and get to grasps with composites. And I do find cutting out is a little bit tricky. Well, this is where Topaz's Mask AI comes in. It's image masking made simple, and with Mask AI's machine learning technology and their tri-map technique, you can power through image masking in record time. So what does that mean? So let's take our little friendly squirrel that we've now got the denoise and sharpened version of. This time it opens in Photoshop. So because Mask AI obviously uses layers, it's not compatible with Lightroom. It can be used as a standalone. I tend to use it as a plugin in Photoshop, and you achieve that by, you look for that via the filter menu. So go to filter, you see Topaz Labs is in there if you've got their products, and Mask AI will appear. So open up in Mask AI. The image initially will open up probably like this, so you have it covered in green. Green is one of the 3 colours of their tri-map system, which means green is, we're keeping anything that's green. And what you need to do with the software is to select the parts of the image that you don't want, and you do that by applying the mask using blue of what image you want, the sort of defined edge between what you want and what you don't want. So if that doesn't sound too confusing, it did to me just then. So for instance, in this particular instance, the software has a subject button, so you can press a subject button, and in this case, Mask AI did a pretty decent job of selecting the subject. It realised it was a squirrel on the fence, or it realised it was an object on a fence with a blurry background, and it found the subject very easily. And this is really what the tri-map system is. So in very simple terms, red means remove, green is keep, and blue is kind of that edge, that transition between what you want to keep and what you want to remove. And you have a brush tool in there that you can then use adjustments to. You can pick a red brush and carry on removing parts that the software may have missed. You can use the green brush to add in parts that you want to keep that the software may have missed. And you can use the blue brush to redefine where the edges should be. So very, very simple, absolutely dead simple to do. And then you can just do things like this. You can just drop in the subjects you found into other images. All very easy to do. This image of Olivia that I showed earlier, again, the same thing, using the subject matter. It does a pretty good job of detecting. Now this one, I didn't do anything other than let it work naturally. So this is the default setting when you press subject. And you'll see in a second when I put it into a different background that it needed a little bit more refinement. But within literally a minute or so of putting that image into mask, I've managed to I can then composite it into another shot. So in this case, we've gone from Harpenden to New York in less than 5 minutes. But if you look closely at the image of New York there, you see where her hand is raised on the hat, just next to Black Glamour. You see there's a little bit of the sort of whiteness that's around the hair and the hand that needed to be masked out a bit better. So I should have gone back into Topaz and used the transparency function, which is a sort of tool that allows you to build a better mask around images where there's some translucency between the sort of the edges of the hair and the background at the time. So I could have improved that, but that was just how it looks on the default setting. So in default, just by pressing a button and creating a cutout object, as you can see, it did a pretty good job, including all that hair on the right-hand side of the image as we look at it. Her left-hand side, it's cut out around the hair really, really well without needing extra refinement. You can also change the sky. Now, Photoshop, funny enough, have just announced the sky replacement function in their software that's coming next year, I believe, or the next big version of Photoshop, which seems to steal from one of the Luminar products. What Mask AI does, rather than have a bank of replacement skies, it just has a find sky feature. So here's a shot of London I took last year in Blue Hour. Again, open the image up in Mask, press the sky button, and it automatically finds the sky. And it does a pretty decent job at it. You can go in and refine it further. One thing you notice I didn't do was refine where those two cranes are sticking up on the left-hand side of the image, sort of a third in. You'll see there's two cranes that you just see the sort of black lines of. I didn't bother going in to refine the mask to pick those up, but I certainly could have done if it was an important shot to do. And then I can just add a sky in. I took this into, this is a sky added into Mask. You can either cut the image out of the bottom and put it into Photoshop and do the rest of the work in Photoshop, or you can put the backgrounds into Mask and composite them there. So the software is really flexible. And then outputting that and just playing around with some colors a little bit more in Lightroom. This is my final shot. And it took less than 5 minutes. It's very, very quick to do. It's as I say, I'm trying to learn Photoshop. Photoshop on masking, compositing, I'm finding a little bit tricky, and I'm just not that skilled at the moment. But the great thing about Topaz and Mask AI is you don't need to be skilled. The software is doing most of that work for you. And it's fantastic. So definitely recommend Mask AI. The other thing that Mask AI can do, which is, again, very clever, and I've got an example here, but I've exaggerated the effect just to demonstrate for this video. But you can blur the background. You can find subjects and then blur the rest of the image behind and create that sort of soft, almost Bokery style background. So here's an image I shot at one of the Grenfell protests, again, a couple of years ago. And what I want to do is select that protester at the front and then blur the rest of the background behind to really give that separation. So again, I've pressed the subject button. It didn't do a very good job automatically selecting the button. So on this image, I've gone in and I've used the brush tools to remove more of the image that I don't want, and then to refine slightly more the mask around him and his sign. So I probably needed to spend a few more minutes. I was doing this for this demo, so I didn't take long on this one. I will probably have masked a little bit more of the glow around his arm that's in the air. I think it's probably a little bit too much of the white edge showing. But again, it's done a pretty decent job and very quickly. And then you have this blur menu on the right-hand side. There's a button called blur. You press that, and then you have this whole number of sliders below where you can affect the amount of blur and then affect the lightness or darkness of the background that you've blurred, highlights and shadows, whites and blacks, etc. The color temperature if it's a color shot. There's so many techniques you can then do to that blurred background. So really, really flexible. And there's the image on the right after the blur background technique has been applied. And then just comparison then. So there's the original shot, and on the right hand side, there's sort of much simpler separated shot. And I probably exaggerated the background more than I would like to. But you get the idea. It's very, very quick to do. Doesn't need a lot of skills like you would probably need to do to achieve this in Photoshop. It's done within minutes and it's really quick. So that's Mask AI. So in terms of pros and cons, for me, it's the best in class at what they do. It's not an all-in-one software that tries to do everything. You know, the DeNoise is the best product for denoising. Sharpen is probably the best product in the market for sharpening. The products do those one functions and they do them extremely well. They can be used as a standalone, which is fantastic if you just want to work with images straight off without other software, or you can use them as plugins for Lightroom in the case of Gigapixel, DeNoise and Sharpen, or in Photoshop with all of the products except, I think, Gigapixel. but certainly Mask AI you need to use in Photoshop really as a plugin. It won't work in Lightroom. I like the fact it's a purchase model rather than an endless subscription. Most of their products are typically around the $80 to $100 mark, so typically $79 or $89 or $99. And when you purchase the product, you also get 1 year of updates. And I've put in brackets they're regular because just recently, in the last month or two, they seem to be putting out updates to the software almost every week. And in one instance, I think we had two updates to DeNoise 2 days in a row. So that's either really good because they keep adding and refining the software, or it's really bad because you could claim they're releasing buggy software that they keep needing to refine. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say actually most of the updates that I've seen them do in the year that I've been using the software has been genuine improvements. Occasionally it's bug fixes, but more often than not it's genuine refinements and improvements to the software, which I really appreciate. In terms of cons, it's definitely processor intensive. I think you need a pretty decent computer with lots of RAM. And I've certainly found it's pretty slow. Now I'm using a 6-year-old iMac, so I haven't got the latest, greatest, fastest computer, but the software is pretty slow. Processing a gigapixel image can take a few minutes. DeNoise, it's normally less than a minute. Sharpen, it can be 2 or 3 minutes, depending on the image. Mask it actually is very quick. I'm finding the masking function is really quick. It's the quickest of the four. It doesn't seem to take long to need to find the subject or the brushes to react as you adjust and refine the tool. So Mask is great, DeNoise is great, Sharpen and Gigapixel are pretty slow on my computer. So in terms of my tips would be, well, because if there's that potential it may be slow on your computer or you might not like the product, you can try it for free. So I think almost all their products you can take on a 30-day free trial. You can go to their site, download the product, install it, try it for 30 days, and then 30 days later it just stops working unless you purchase it. So that's up to you to do, and I definitely recommend that. See if it works with your computer. Have a look and see if you'll use the product. Is it better than what you're currently doing? And if it's not, then don't buy it. But I'm really pleased with the software, and it's definitely made a massive improvement to the images that I've been post-processing. My other tip would be to buy it when it's on sale. I found Topaz frequently are doing promotions and often giving $10 or sometimes $20 off a product. It might mean a long wait. I don't know how many times they do that for each product per year, but I've certainly seen, I think, DeNoise and Sharpen on promotion at least once or twice this year so far. So that could be worth waiting for if you have the patience to do that. But my other tip would be to always use a discount code. I've got a referral code which I've put here. I've listed here, and I'll put in the description on YouTube as well. And that gets you an extra 15%. And I found it actually works even on top of the sale price. So if the product is on sale for $10, $20 off, then you can apply the discount code and get an extra 15% off as well. And then it's down to a price that's almost a no-brainer because these products are so good. There's also free tutorials on YouTube that will give you more information than I've given today and can show you the whole processes. So the software is pretty straightforward, but there's no harm in checking out some of the tutorials that are on YouTube. And most of the people that I've found that are putting the tutorials on there also have their discount codes and referral codes on there as well. So that's DeNoise, Gigapixel, Sharpen and Mask. I hope that presentation helps and you found it useful, and good luck, and hope you get on well with the Topaz products if you decide to try them out. Take care.